Oh. My name is Amy. I'm going to go through my research presentation. So before I start, I'd like to say thank you to my supervisor Lydia for helping me throughout this process, and also I'd like to say thank you to Bradgate Park Trust for allowing me to do my research on their grounds and on their deer. So I looked into how anthropogenic disturbances affect the 3 roaming deer at Bradgate Park. Now, anthropogenic disturbances relate to anything relating to people. So it could be like activities like hiking or horseback riding or biking, and it can just be noise disturbances like if a child screams. So Bradgate Park is a public accessible park and has been for many years. It consists mostly of moorland and forest, and it houses 550 red and fallow deer. So I'm looking into how what effect people have on the deer at Bradgate Park. So to begin, I'm going to go through the introduction and a quick rationale why I'm doing this. Then I'm going to state the alternative and null hypothesis. I'm going to go through the literature review and some of the areas that I've looked into. I'm going to look into the methodology, how I completed this research. I'm going to look at the statistical results. I'm going to interpret and discuss these results also by using the raw data to see what they mean and how they support or contradict the hypothesis. Then I'm going to run through what my conclusions are. To begin, so Silva et al. And Pelletier established the impact of anthropogenic disturbances onto ungulates, and they found that it had both the behavioural and physiological effect. These can include things like avoidance behaviours, increased stress, increased energy expenditure, all of which can have a negative impact on the deer's welfare. So Alponio et al. Highlighted the need for more research into this area in order to help deer conservation. So knowing these things, I decided to research and do a case study at Bradgate Park on their deer to see what extent that people may have on the deer and which can be then used for conservation by Bradgate Park. So I set out with 2 hypotheses. My alternative hypothesis, which is anthropogenic disturbances such as human recreational activities, domestic dogs walked in the park, the noise level, litter dropped by humans, and canines will have a detrimental effect on the deer's well-being and spatial occupancy of their habitat, and which can be shown by increased usage of restricted areas during peak times of human activity. The null hypothesis states that the anthropogenic disturbances, previously said, will not have any statistical relevance on the deer behavioural well-being and their spatial occupancy. Things like human and canine density, anthropogenic disturbances such as canine and then also litter effects were looked at individually to help look at the hypotheses. To start, we're going to look through the literature review related to anthropogenic disturbances. So there's contradicting findings, mainly, but Cooper and Lumsden said that the effect from people may vary depending if they're on or off foot or on or off known trails to the deer. The disturbances that cause the greatest effect are known to be varied. Some reports found it to be humans on foot, some found it to be motorised vehicles, and others found that presence was enough to cause a response. But it's important to note that there's other factors that may cause the deer response to be different. So these include intrinsic factors, which are described by Bolnick et al. As sex, age, condition, and individual personality. And there's also extrinsic factors, described by Cote et al. As environmental conditions, so it's an open or closed habitat, the individual's previous exposure to the certain disturbance, and the herd makeup. So a herd made up of adults is less likely to have a greater response than a herd made up of females and their young. So spatial and temporal avoidance was also commented on in a lot of research. Nix et al. Found that temporal responses were due to human density, and then Bonnot et al. Found that spatial avoidance was due to the deer's perceived threat of the disturbance. So basically, the deer may avoid certain spaces at certain times to avoid people in relation to disturbances that they may cause. The overall literature for canine disturbances, Hughes and MacDonald found that out of 66 out of 69 reviews, all found dogs to have an impact, which is incredibly high. But there was also contradicting evidence for whether dogs on or off lead had the most effect. So Weston and Stankovic found that they had the same effect, whereas Young et al. Found that leash dogs had the most effect and were increasingly detrimental. But Silva, Rodriguez and Siving found that there was no difference in deer vigilance to either of these two. So, with contradicting evidence, it's hard to say what the effect would be at Bradgate, which is why I decided to look into it. And then lastly, Nordberg and Squarkopf found that the vigilance behaviours in response to human and canine disturbances were the same and they didn't differ. So this therefore indicated to them that the perceived risk is what caused the reaction and not the real threat itself. To move on to the literature and anthropogenic litter, all research found that litter had a detrimental effect on the entire ecosystem. It's mainly found that litter increased in areas where there was increased human density, so areas like picnic benches and main paths and cafes all have most amounts of litter. It's easier to drop there, and there's just more people to drop it. So Bates et al. Found that there are certain litter types that will be dropped more, so he found that cigarette butts consisted of 45% of all the litter that is dropped. And then Barnes et al. Found that there's a wide range of negative impacts, which can include starvation and the false satisfaction of hunger, choking. For cigarette butts, it's quite nicotine toxicity is a threat. However, the reports of it are quite rare. Either way, the potential effects can be substantial. So, to see what the effects are at Bradgate and to see how it compared to literature, I found 3 placements within the park to compare. The first is the main path, which is the red section here, and consists of the first 200 metres odd of path from the Newtown Linford car park. This is likely to be an area of high human density. In this area, dogs will have to be on lead during the daytime. This area is also a closed area, so there's a river on one side, which you can see towards the bottom, and then also towards the top is quite steep and sloped, so it's hard for the deer to escape. For comparison, I then picked what I've called the accessible field, which is just below the Old John Tower. This is an open habitat, and I thought it was likely to have smaller human density. On this area, dogs can be off lead if they're under control, so this allows some effective comparisons to be made. The third place I chose was the human restricted field, known as the Deer Meadow. This is an area where people cannot get into, and it's served as the control group. It also helped to see if human restricted areas are effective for reducing deer disturbances from people and hopefully increasing their welfare. So to do this, I used a mixed method approach. I used quantitative methods for human and canine density, which I used a tally chart throughout a 20-minute period in each of the placements in the midday, morning and evening. And I counted every individual and every individual dog. I also used this method for the anthropogenic and canine disturbances in the form of behavioural observations. So I used a self-made ethogram, and I went to the 3 placements, morning, midday and evening, on different days and also the weekend in order to see the difference. So I looked at certain behaviours like alert and relaxed behaviours. I also counted the disturbances, which was used for symbols within each minute. The behavioural observations were done continuously and a maximum of 4 deer were looked at. I used some qualitative methods for canine disturbances over time and also the anthropogenic litter effect. This was just to expand my own knowledge and to help support or contradict the hypotheses and to collect data on areas that just wouldn't fall into the data collection period. I compared the quantitative methods using a paired t-test. So the results for human and canine density, I compared the canine and the human density with the alert and relaxed behaviours. And as it's seen on the significant value, there was no significance in any of the data sets, they were all above 0.05. This was due to a small sample size. This meant that the null hypothesis could not be discarded and the results could not be compared to any other studies. But the anthropogenic disturbances results found that when I compared the alert and relaxed behaviours and different placements, pairs 1 to 8 all had significance in their comparisons. Pair 9, the alert behaviours on the main path versus the alert behaviours on the accessible field was not significant and had a value of 0.379. This means that pairs 1 to 8 supported the alternative hypothesis, but pair 9 supported the null hypothesis. So, for the discussion, the first part, let's look at why pair 9 might have been insignificant. And there might decide that there's various factors that could have affected this outcome. So there's a higher human density on the main path. There's more people there, it's closer to the gate, it's closer to the car park, it's more accessible, it's on a tarmac concrete path. Although of course the study did not show any significance for human density, this means that this cannot be proven and it's just a theory. The second possibility for the difference was that there's some environmental differences between open and closed areas. As I said, the main path is a closed area and the accessible field is an open area. Although the studies did contradict with open or closed areas increased or reduced vigilance, this study would support the theories that the closed areas increased vigilant behaviours and therefore open areas were better for them. Nevertheless, studies on the environmental differences would have to be done. The deer herd size differed in each area, so though I only ever looked at a maximum of 4 deer, the herds that were on the accessible field were often quite large and consisted of at least more than 20, whereas all the deer observations in the main path were always a max of 4 and normally 2 or 3. Deer are more likely to feel safe in larger herds, so it's understandable that this may have impacted the increased vigilance on the main path. There may have also been a pre-existing association with anthropogenic disturbances on the main path due to it being open to the public for years and years. So they may just be more likely to expect them and to be looking out for them more. This to say doesn't mean that it's acceptable for them to be more vigilant, it may just be a reason for it. So we're going to look at some of the alert and relaxed behaviours on the 3 placements. So in general, the total relaxed and alert behaviours and placements and alongside the statistical data show that the main path was viewed as having the most risk, and the restricted field was seen as a safe area, and the accessible field closely resembled the restricted field. So the main path had the highest disturbance rate, then the accessible field, and then a human restricted field. And so the lighter blue columns show the alert behaviours. You see it's highest on the main path, second on the accessible field, and then lowest on the human restricted field. Whereas relaxed behaviours, the dark blue columns, are highest on the human restricted field, which closely resembles the accessible field, and it's lowest on the main path. This does help to support the fact that the human restricted field is seen as a safe area for the deer and is important for their welfare, well-being, and also for avoiding people. This also shows that the accessible field, safety-wise, is seen as similar to the human restricted field, but sometimes can be seen as an area of risk due to the alert behaviours being similar to the main path. Energy expenditure was something that was quite commonly seen as a large issue in many research. It can have detrimental effects on deer welfare. So by comparing the relaxed and alert foraging behaviours in each of the places, the main path had the least total foraging behaviours, as you see below. It had the least relaxed behaviours, but the most alert behaviours. The accessible field had the highest foraging behaviours compared to the human restricted field, which had slightly less. This is possibly due to the human restricted field mostly consisting of relaxing behaviours like lying down or sleeping, which is why there's less of them, whereas the accessible field was largely used for foraging, grazing and eating when they could. But it does show that compared to the main path to the accessible field and even the human restricted field, there is an energy expenditure trade-off occurring which could be detrimental to their welfare. However, it's important to note the spatial and temporal avoidance behaviours that the deer might have shown. So I compared the when and where the behavioural observations of the first 1 month period took place. And the results showed that the main path, there were 7 in total, and 6 of these, as you can see, occurred in the morning, and 1 of them occurred at midday. They were never there in the afternoon. When you compare this to the accessible field, whereas they had similar observation numbers, the accessible field had 3 at midday, 2 in the afternoon, and 1 in the morning. They're less spread out in the accessible field, which shows that the main path definitely had some spatial and temporal behaviours being exhibited in order to avoid people. The human restricted field had the most observations, and it consisted of 14 in total. 7 of these took place at midday, 4 in the afternoon, and 3 were in the morning. The deer did not display any spatial and temporal avoidance like they did on the main path. This is like usually when human density is, but as I said earlier, this would have to be looked into further. So human density generally peaks at lunchtime and throughout the day, depending on what day it is. So this is why the main path mostly had deer in the mornings. And then they disappeared throughout the day, whereas on the human restricted field, they were mostly there at midday, when the human density is likely to be higher. This means that they were avoiding certain areas when they could be at other areas, like so avoiding the human restricted field when they could be in the main path. But when human density increased, they were more likely to move from areas of high density, the main path, to the human restricted field where they know they're safer. So this supports other studies that found that deer do change their behaviours for spatial and temporal avoidance. Using the human restricted field will have minimised the disturbance that's had on them. However, because they still were on the main path in the morning, it shows that they are to some extent maybe habituated and are not too worried about it in the mornings. Nevertheless, these results, alongside the behaviours exhibited, indicated that human restricted fields are essential for reducing the disturbances that the people may have. To move on to canine disturbances. Reactions to human and canines generally did not differ throughout the observations. This could be due to habituation or due to the theory that the reactions aren't due to the threat itself, but the potential risk of the threat. Although it was hard to differentiate if the reaction was for the human or the canine, because in this study they were always together. Outside of data collection, it was observed twice where a canine chased a dog, but never during the collection period. Something else that I intended to look at was a comparison of dogs on and off lead and these disturbances. However, on the accessible field where the canines could be off lead, the owners always put their dogs on lead before crossing the field. Although this meant a comparison can't be done, it does mean that the regulations put in place by Bradgate, which states that dogs have to be off lead if they are under control, are effective and working and that people are following them, and this will improve the welfare of the deer, as the responses will likely have been a lot higher than if they were off the lead, as seen on outside of data collection when the dogs chased the deer. So the questionnaires which are used for the literature and questionnaires for the anthropogenic litter completely coincide with the literature that I read. And the general consensus was that discarded litter amount changes seasonally. It's higher in the summer and on bank holidays, even in the winter, and also for events like weddings. This was seen in human density. The normal day-to-day was a lot lower than days like New Year's Day, where it was a lot higher. Certain areas also have increased litter, which also correlated with the earlier literature. Areas like picnic benches, cafes, the main paths, 50 metres off the main path, and also 50 to 100 metres from the entrance to the parks were areas where litter was highest. It's also found that the common items described by Beta et al. Earlier were cigarette butts. This was agreed largely by people and everyone mentioned it. However, dog waste bags, bottles, glass shards and wet wipes also highlighted as litter items that are quite popular to be thrown away. So generally out of these items, it was concluded that the effect on the overall population is minimal. It was stated that last year during the cull, 2 out of 200 deer had litter ingestion, which is only 1% and not enough to be statistically relevant. However, the effect on the individuals could be fatal. There was an incident where a deer had a plastic bag cut its antlers and in distress harmed itself and had to be culled. To conclude, areas used by people consequently increased the disturbances, which is why the main path did have the highest disturbance rate. However, human restricted areas were therefore vital for deer welfare and reducing the disturbances, and this study helps support the fact that they are effective at reducing disturbance on the deers and increasing welfare. Another thing that was clear that was the deer exhibited spatial and temporal behaviours in order to avoid or take advantage of differing human density numbers. That's why they avoid the main path in the day, but spent their time on the human restricted field during the day and less so in the morning. This shows that they, to some extent, can be habituated to people and know when and where they want to be. The canine effect requires further study, but initial reports show that they could have an effect, but nothing could be fully drawn within this study. And for anthropogenic litter, it's a constant issue, but it has minimal effect on the overall population, but on individuals the effect may be fatal. This may be helped by the fact that Bradgate has a volunteer group that help litter pick, but either way, even though it's not statistically relevant, that does not mean it should be discarded as being acceptable. So, overall, although some of the results do suggest the null hypothesis cannot be discarded, more research is needed to help see if this is true or not for the ones that were statistically relevant, not relevant due to lack of data, but some of the results generally supported the alternative hypothesis. Thank you for watching. I have my references on the last 2 slides.